the great conservative movement of America and of our time. A brush fire of freedom that's being lit all over this country. We, as an irate, tireless American populace, will overcome the few radical leftists that control the levers of power today. Joe Biden's failed economic policies has given us inflation like you can't believe, and the border is in disarray.
It's amazing how few of the people commenting on this have actually bothered to go see what's happening. Well, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona actually went to the border.
Biggs, where's Andy? Boy, oh boy, Andy. There's a guy. He's tough.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Biggs, Congressman from Arizona's 5th Congressional District. Thanks for joining us again on our regular or semi-regular podcast called What's the Biggs Idea? I'm so glad that you'd be with us, joining us today. I'm also especially grateful to be joined by our special guest today, Calley Means. I heard Calley speak just, 2-3 weeks ago in a congressional breakfast I was at called Conservative Opportunity Society. And I was so impressed by the information he had. I wanted him to share it on our podcast and get his message out broader as we can. So he is the founder of True Medicine, a graduate of Stanford University and Harvard Business School. He's currently writing a book about how preventable cellular dysfunction is at the root of nearly every chronic condition of American life. And so today we're going to talk about food. We're going to talk about pharma, big food, big pharma, and the impact that they have on American lives. And Calley, just tell everybody a little bit about your qualifications and who you are.
Thank you so much, Andy. So I grew up actually in Georgetown, in the swamp in Washington, D.C., and grew up as a good young conservative. I worked for President Bush. I interned at the Heritage Foundation, worked on some campaigns, and then was interesting to learn. And I know you know this, but a lot of folks on campaigns inevitably find themselves at these consulting companies. And I found myself with people from across the aisle working inevitably for food and pharma companies. Pharma is the number one spender in DC and spends 5 times more than the oil industry. And I thought at the time that being a good young conservative was pretty much defending free enterprise, defending the ingenuity of pharma, the ingenuity of American agriculture. And I found myself, specifically working for Coca-Cola to make sure government funding flew to Coke. So I actually worked with them to ensure that food stamp funding, that the number one nutrition program for lower income Americans, actually Coke stayed as the number one item purchased on food stamps. 10% of food stamps to this day. We were successful. Now I believe, unfortunately, that now 10% of food stamps, the nutrition program, that 15% of Americans depend on to go to sugary drinks. I also found myself across the table with pharma companies. And at the time in 2011, the opioids were a big thing. And we were steering research funding to ensure that opioids had relaxed standards and that we would produce studies to influence the NIH and Congress to relax opioid standards. And we all know the devastation that's caused. So got out of that and got more into entrepreneurship. And in retrospect, and this has been an awakening, Andy, in the past couple of years, I've had some instances in my life that I think is very common to many Americans. My mom got a chronic condition. She was one of the 50% of Americans who had prediabetes, which led really directly to her pancreatic cancer, which killed her 12 days after the diagnosis in 2021. The doctors at the hospital, at Stanford Hospital, like many times when people have cancer, said, "Oh, it's random, it's bad luck." We learned that it wasn't random. Cancers, dementia, a lot of the diseases that we think kind of are random are highly tied to prediabetes, which is actually tied to food. So that really woke me up. And then my sister was, the pride of the family, Stanford Med School, top of her class, surgeon. She actually realized that at medical school, she didn't take one class of nutrition. 90% of her curriculum in American medical schools from Stanford, Harvard on down are on pharmacology. More than 50% of funding for medical schools is somehow tied to pharma. And she had this out-of-body experience where she realized she didn't know why her patients were sick. She just knew how to kind of drug them and do surgeries down the line, which made everyone money. So she's been on a path to and a thought leader on this. And then last, Andy, just kind of what brought me to this issue is I've got a new son, and I think the world kids are going into, and this kind of ties it all together. I believe as a conservative, this is the most important underappreciated conservative issue. We have a human capital devastation right now happening in this country. When you look at kids, where almost 50% are obese or overweight, where 25% of children now have prediabetes. Prediabetes is cellular dysfunction that impacts their bodies and their brains and how they look at the world. 15% of kids having prediabetes, suicide being the number 2 cause of death now among teenagers. Everything, autoimmune conditions, allergies, all of these chronic conditions are happening at the same time, particularly to kids. There's a lot of incentives that I saw to make this complicated, Andy, to confuse members of Congress and confuse the public. This is simple. It's about food, and that's the mission I'm on.
So. Man, what a background, what a story to get us into this deal. And I guess the first question, I'm going to give you 2 questions at once, because the first question I wanted to ask you is 42% of all Americans and actually younger kids, it's about 50% are considered obese. So I want to know how we got there, and then ultimately, what do you mean by processed foods? And tell us what those really are and their role in this epidemic of obesity.
Right. Yes. So it's 40% roughly. It's growing substantially of American adults are clinically obese, which is a very serious thing. About 80% of adults are obese or overweight, according to the CDC. And then about 20% of kids are clinically obese. And then about 45% of kids are obese or overweight, which are just different classifications. But you're looking at a situation right now where you just have to look around where 80% of Americans are obese or overweight. And as we know, this has just skyrocketed. These were very low percentages just 40 years ago. And I just kind of want to say, tying it to the food, we're being led to believe, and I'm a conservative, I'm a free choice guy, I'm a personal responsibility guy, but I think there's something very important conservatives need to understand is that when you look at those rates of obesity and disease among kids, and you look at 80% of Americans, being obese or overweight, or 60% having a chronic condition right now, Americans haven't systematically become lazier in the last 40 years. They haven't systematically had a death wish, and obesity is a death wish. You are going to die substantially earlier and have many, many more issues in your life with obesity. We're not being clear on that, but that's just a fact. And I don't think Americans are trying to systematically miss playing with their grandkids. So we got to ask systemically what's happened, and systemically tying it to food. There's 3 key things that have happened to our food. About 100 years ago, we were pretty much on a whole food diet. About 50 years ago, we were largely on a whole food diet. Today in America, 75% of the American diet is an ultra processed diet. Now, I used to say, well, that's because of a free market. That's because of free choice. We don't want a nanny state. No, but actually that's because of a rigged crony capitalist system. We actually steer the government through really rigged policies, steer tens of millions of dollars to 3 ingredients, to subsidize 3 ingredients. And those 3 ingredients that make up highly processed foods are, number 1, added processed sugar. We are eating 100 times more sugar than we did 100 years ago. That is a nuclear weapon for the cells. And again, I think Coke should exist. I don't think Coke should be funded $10 billion by food stamps, one of their top sources of revenue. I don't think high fructose corn syrup, which is devastating to our cells, should be subsidized billions of dollars by the government. You look at the next ingredient, highly processed grains. You look at any packaged food, you've got some kind of processed wheat. That is a new invention in the last 100 years. The processing was invented about 100 years ago, and it involves taking those whole grains that we're all, have eaten throughout our entire, evolution, takes the fiber off, which depletes the nutritional value, and the fiber, which is the nutrition part, actually can erode on the shelf. So it makes it shelf stable, but with that fiber off, which also blunts the glucose impact, everything we're eating, those grains are hidden sugars and become highly addictive and raise our glucose. And the last is seed oils. And this is something I think people are catching on to. It's very important. You look at any label, even if it's a healthy food, you think you're buying at Whole Foods, you see canola oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil. These were also invented in just the last 100 years. Actually, John Rockefeller created these oils as a byproduct from his manufacturing. We essentially have industrial byproduct as the top source of American fat versus animal fats, which have been, very belittled unrightfully, versus grass-fed butter versus olive oil. So we've got inflammatory fats. So the problem, Andy, is I actually believe Americans will make the right decisions if operating in a free market. But all of these items are heavily subsidized. The top source of children's lunches is federally funded school lunch programs. There's not even a sugar limit on that. I think, Michelle Obama I think miscommunicated that. I think we need the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Treasury talking about how we're subsidizing sugar for our kids, because right now, 80% of 21-year-old males aren't even eligible to join the military because of their weight and their fitness. And this, what we're funding here, this food, and this is why I think it's just such a non-conservative policy that we're funding our own destruction. This food is directly leading to trillions of downstream health impacts. And the last point I'll make here is if you take the line items of the budget and you actually look at what we're spending as a government for just to care for diabetes and the impact of diabetes, it's multiples more than the defense budget and growing at a much higher rate. This is preventable. So to me, it's public policy insanity, where on the front end, we're actually subsidizing, encouraging this food. And then on the back end, we're paying trillions of dollars for it and destroying our human capital.
Yeah. And so Calley, I want to emphasize a couple of points you're making, because I think number one, you're describing a distorted marketplace, what I call a distorted marketplace. And that would be number one, on the front end, we've chosen winners and losers. And the winners that we've chosen are sugar, corn syrup, and corn. Actually, we subsidize massive amounts of corn growth in this country. And then the third thing would be the seed oils. So we've distorted the marketplace in favor of that. And then on the back end, our social welfare system is going to have to eat up all the costs of the secondary or tertiary impacts of what we've done to distort the marketplace on the front end. And so it's this massive, leave out the health stuff. It is a terrifically bad economic problem, as well as a social problem that we have.
Well, Andy, I think you tie it very well and segue very well to what I call the devil's bargain. It's just, and again, this is not, let's take partisanship, anything out of this. I just have a very simple statement. We are all getting sick primarily because of food. This is not complicated. Okay. And in a way, you almost expect the food companies, to be fighting to make food cheaper and more addictive. You expect them to be lobbying you for sugar and grain subsidies. You expect them to be heavily lobbying, like the FTC, to be the only country in the world where the number one advertiser on children's program for 3-year-olds is sugary cereals. You expect you expect them to be lobbying and having the lead NIH study also funded by food companies and saying Lucky Charms is healthier than beef. It's terrible. But you
stop right there, Calley. I think people need to hear that. Is that real? Is that a real study?
Yeah. So working for food, I actually helped, and a huge thing. So food contributes, the processed food industry, 11 times more money to foundational nutritional research than the NIH. And the NIH itself is contributing, and really a grant-making organization that gives money to researchers who are already paid by food. So food has a stranglehold over nutritional research. When I was working for Coke, the core goal was produce nutrition research. We are the only animal, humans, in the world who are systematically obese and have systematically high rates of diabetes. It's because we're confused. We are born with an innate understanding of what we should have inside our body, but we have crazy studies saying, we've had studies, the lead government studies saying that seed oils were the best source of fat. We've had literally prominent studies from Harvard leading to the 1990s food pyramid saying that sugar didn't cause obesity and was actually a good source of energy for kids. I mean, we have had just Orwellian studies funded by the food companies. You'd think it's kind of over. To this day, the lead NIH, you can't even believe this, but the lead nutrition study from the NIH, it's called the Food Compass, done in joint collaboration with Tufts Nutrition School, which is one of the top nutrition schools. The head of that school is the head of President Biden's Nutrition Council. And that dean takes significant money from personal payments, not just research, from food companies. And the school, he admitted to me, is totally propped up by food donations. Actually, that study, which is funded millions of dollars by the NIH and food companies, said that Lucky Charms were healthier than beef and Honey Nut Cheerios were healthier than eggs. And this would be funny. It's absurd. There's a lot of funny tweets about it. But this, literally on the press release from that study, it said the point of this study is to influence childhood nutrition marketing guidelines. So it's so tragic. And unfortunately, what I saw earlier in my career is you fund the academics, the NIH gives research. You can't have more highly regarded studies than Tufts or Harvard or all these top schools that put their stamp on the study. It's peer-reviewed research. And then the second that study's out, the lobbyists and the folks at these companies are like going to the school boards or going to the federal government, and they're like, no, you don't need to do you don't need to do eggs, you don't need to do more beef or good protein for kids. You can do these fortified Frankenfood cereals. So anyway, okay, so that's almost, you get it. Like food is fighting in their interests. Okay, fine. The problem is that and this is the key thing, and this is my really, I would say, my key message. When you get to healthcare, every single institution that impacts our health makes money when we're sick and loses money when we're healthy. There is nothing better for every lever of the healthcare industry than a kid early on who's obese or pre-diabetic, because they're not going to die, but they're going to have a lot of issues. If you're diabetic, you have a 3 times higher rate of depression because literally you have cellular dysregulation. That's what diabetes is. A lot of that's in your brain. You're going to have heart disease. So when a kid starts getting on a statin, starts getting on a blood pressure medication, starts getting on metformin for diabetes, starts getting on Adderall, which 15% of high schoolers are on, starts getting on, all of these cascading issues, that's a very profitable patient because there's more recurring revenue for pharma companies. They've got a lot of hospital visits. There's more to do at medical schools to train doctors to treat all these conditions. Literally, even insurance, because with Obamacare, there was a populist uprising that insurance can only take a 15% medical loss rate. So they can only make 15%. But by law, they can raise premiums to get that 15%. So since they are capped with Obamacare of only taking 15%, they're incentivized for the pie, for costs to grow, for people to get more sick because they can just raise premiums. That's exactly what's happened. So
just to make clear so people understand, the old pie was this, and they could only get 15%. Their incentive then is to increase the cost pie. So when you increase the cost pie, the wedge, the shape of that 15%, it actually grows exponentially.
I actually even talk to lawmakers or regulators or people with health policy degrees from Harvard. They don't understand that fact. When I say every institution in medicine is incentivized for us to be sicker for longer periods of time, for costs to go up, which means people getting more sick, that's what's happening. So are people evil? Is a researcher at a pharma company or a person that works at an insurance company evil? No, but I'm talking to a lot of them. I'm talking to a lot of senior people at all these institutions, and they will lose money. There will be layoffs if people don't increasingly get sick. So this is a bit of the problem. And I think a big problem, and I think people on the right and the left miss this, is that because we're getting so sick, healthcare is the largest and the fastest growing industry in the United States, which is actually crazy when you think about it. The fastest growing and the largest, and it's producing worse outcomes. Unfortunately, in 78% of US states, the largest employer is either a food company, Walmart, or the biggest employer in most states is a health entity. So it's jobs, jobs, jobs. I was recently in Texas, and the governor of Texas, who's done some good work on many issues, was bragging that the Texas Medical Center in Houston can be seen from space and is the country's largest medical center. That's not a good thing. The fact that we have larger and larger hospitals everywhere is actually a bad sign. The fact that in most major cities you see a massive children's hospital, that's not a sign of progress, but it is actually heralded as jobs and progress. So that's the incentive, and I think this is what's very important for people to understand. You'd expect the dean of Harvard Medical School, the head of the NIH, or the Surgeon General, they could do a press conference tomorrow together on the steps of Congress saying a simple truth, which is that we're all getting sick because of a rigged food system. They're not going to do that because everyone is profiting from the fact that everyone is sick. And the medical system is not how do we keep people healthy. They're heroes for standing at the end of the line once we get sick, which is actually not how healthcare should work. So I just, taking it to pharma, every drug, and let me just make this very clear. We've had a lot of medical miracles, but they've been usually before 1960 for acute issues that could kill us, emergency surgical procedures, antibiotics, things like that. Now, 95% of costs are driven by chronic conditions, but the more statins we prescribe, the more heart disease goes up. The more metformin we prescribe, the more diabetes goes up. Literally every drug, you get SSRIs and depression. Now 25% of women take an SSRI, depression, suicide is going up. These aren't curing the root cause issues, which is metabolic dysfunction. And now, and this is, I think, a very important and one of the most important issues in the country, now we have a miracle cure for obesity, which is the target market, as I said, is 80% of adults who are obese or overweight. The drug itself, the FDA, the people deciding it are literally being paid by the drug maker itself. They didn't even take into account how people were losing weight. It just came out, the people that take this drug, they're actually losing muscle mass and gaining fat. So the drug is actually making you more fat, but lose weight. It's causing a lot of other issues, depression. And now there's a full court press. I think over 200 members of Congress have been paid, have been lobbied. There's been massive lobbying on this. They have a bill saying that Medicare and Medicaid should be paying for this. It will be the most expensive drug in American history. And the doctors that are pushing this from Harvard that are standing to make a lot of money with lifetime patients, this is a lifetime injection. They're literally saying the message is twofold. Number one, you can't make this up, but Harvard doctors are saying obesity is not the result of what you eat or how much you move. They're literally saying that. They're saying it's a genetic condition that you need a drug for. They're also aggressively saying that it's an example of systemic racism, just as Coca-Cola and I saw pay off the NAACP to say that it's racist not to have food stamps funding for Coke, and we can talk more about that. The NAACP is a registered lobbyist today for Ozempic, and they are aggressively saying that we're being racist for not having government money go to this miracle cure. We're losing our minds here. We're overcomplicating the issue. We've got to get back to clear communication to the American people. Like, we should be a vibrant, healthy society. We shouldn't be a nanny state, but right now we have a reverse nanny state. We have a corporate cronyism owned state where we're really literally becoming fat, sick, depressed, and infertile. Male sperm count is down over 50% in a generation. You talk to I'm in my 30s. Most women I know are dealing with infertility. These things are off the charts, Andy. And it's actually, we talked a little bit about being depressed. I'm actually optimistic because the solutions are actually not that complicated.
Well, Calley, we're just about out of time. I mean, this is the thing where we may have to do this again in a few weeks from history. But I would just want to give you one anecdote and then find out where people can follow you.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, I was on the science committee, and I introduced legislation to stop subsidies for corn production. And guess what? I think there were 3 people that voted yes with me. The rest of the committee voted no, because it turns out every state, their ag industry is getting so much money from the government for corn subsidies. This is where I first got looking at that, and says really, really disturbing to me that we've, as you say, we're doing the front end and then we get hit on the back end. Calley, how can people follow you on social media?
Thank you, Andy. And I just real quick, I do think farmers are a key. I don't think they like this. They're in this rigged system. I think farmers are going to save us, honestly. And I talk to a lot of them. They don't love these addiction to subsidies. yeah, hopefully next time we can talk solutions, because I think there are some. But right now, yeah, I'm on a warpath here. Again, you got a lot of doctors talking about these issues. I come from, really the incentives perspective. I'm tweeting about that. Not a huge fan of Twitter, but it is a good way to get out there at Calley means. And then my company, TrueMed.com, I've been thinking really hard about what to actually do. And it's actually using public policy. It's if you have a note from a doctor actually outlining dietary interventions and exercise to reverse disease, you can actually use potentially some money on your HSA, some medical spending, shift them away from pharma once you get sick, and actually use food as medicine. So I think that's an important part of it. So TrueMed.com is my company, where we're really on a warpath here. And Calley means, as you said, I'm working on a book with my sister who's just amazing, and we're just proud to be in the fight here. Andy, thanks for bringing attention to this.
Yeah, Calley, thanks so much, and look forward to seeing the book. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. You can follow me at Rep Andy Biggs AZ, and that's both Truth and Twitter, Instagram at Rep Andy Biggs, or you can go to my official site, which is biggs.house.gov. You can get the audio version of the podcast. It's on Spotify or Apple Podcast at What's the Biggs Idea. Calley, thanks so much. I'm sorry we're out of time, man.
Thank you, sir.
We could talk hours about this.
Thanks for bringing